All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Kachalis, and I'm the Director of Strategic Insights here at Progressive Business Media. And I'm going to be your host for today's webinar, focusing on why pilling puts fabric durability to the test. We have a lot of great insights to cover on the webinar, and I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for today. But before we get started, there's just a couple housekeeping items I'd like to go over. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please submit them in the questions section in the panel at the right-hand side of your screen. At the end of the webinar, we're going to take about 10 to 15 minutes to answer your questions. If at any point you're having technical problems during the webinar, we ask you to please try logging out and logging back in, or send a question in the chat box where a member of our technical team can answer your question. And finally, if you register for today's webinar and happen to miss a segment of today's presentation, there will be a recording link that will be emailed out to all registered attendees. All right, now that it's covered, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Our first speaker is Leanne Flack. Leanne is a marketing manager for Milliken's specialty interiors business. In her role, she leads both strategic marketing and marketing communication efforts. She's instrumental in identifying businesses' best opportunities for growth across all relevant markets. Fluent in French and English, she's a Six Sigma Black Belt and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Business Economics and French from Wofford College. Our second speaker for today is Andrew Dobbins. Andrew has nearly 15 years' experience in textile engineering and production management. Few people know more about technical aspects of fabrics than Andrew does. His deep expertise in fabric formation, specifically in weaving, has made him a key resource internally and for Milliken customers and prospects looking to enhance performance attributes and drive greater efficiencies or create new solutions to pressing problems. Andrew holds a Bachelor's of Science degree in business. All right, we're now ready to start. Leanne, I'm going to be opening up the webinar for you to begin your presentation.
All right, thank you, Mark, and thank you guys for joining us today. So I'm going to cover an agenda just to let you know what we'll be covering. We're going to start off talking about pilling and what it is, and then move into residential guidelines, and then cover test methods, and then conclude with best practices and some key questions. So what is pilling? You know, pilling is a small ball of fibers that forms on the face due to abrasion on the surface, making the fabric look warm. Certain fibers have a natural tendency to separate and move more easily in fabric due to how the yarns are made. So when friction is repeated to these fibers, they can twist together and create this pill that forms on the face of the fabric. And although the fibers are then twisted in a ball, they often cling to the other fibers, and it causes it to stick to the surface. So that's really what we're seeing with these pill balls that you may see on upholstery. I know I have them in sweaters. You can see them in lots of different types of fabrics. And so I guess what you have to look at is, you know, how does the friction happen? And it really does happen from just normal everyday use. You have in upholstery, the friction is caused from while you're sitting or when you're getting up and down on the furniture. It can also occur when the person is what they're wearing is actually rubbing against the upholstered fabric. And then another way is for when the two fabric edges might be rubbing together, like an arm and a cushion, for example. You may see some rubbing there, which creates friction. So friction is definitely a driver for creating pilling. Another one that we don't always think about is the laundry and dryers. That also creates friction and can also lead to pilling. And then one that can be a little unsightly sometimes is what we call reverse pilling. And it's when you have fibers from your clothes, dust, dirt, they get entangled with upholstery fiber, and it creates a different color, usually a gray, or it could even be blue, but it'll look like an odd ball of a different color fiber on your furniture. So I'm going to move into, you know, what types of fabrics are most likely to pill. And in the diagram here, we've got a picture of a spun yarn and a filament yarn. And pilling is not necessarily likely to occur in man-made versus natural. It really depends on how the fiber is made within the yarn. So in the top diagram here, you have spun yarn, and it has short fibers. And you can see in the diagram the little fibers sticking out. And then with filament yarn, it's more of a continuous fiber. And so they're less likely to move and create the pill balls. So you typically may see this in a spun yarn versus a filament yarn. But if you have spun yarns made with longer fiber, or if those spun yarns are put into a very tight weave, that also reduces the chance of pilling. So you get this question a lot, is pilling a defect? And the short answer is no. Pilling is definitely a natural occurrence. It can happen in some types of fabrics. It's really not a breakdown. And it's typically not covered under warranties at a lot of retailers. As the fiber settles, the pilling will decrease over time. But it does present a lot of challenges for manufacturers and retailers because it's visual and it is a nuisance. So you have to really communicate to consumers up front that pilling can happen, and here's what you do to, remedy the issue. We've seen been doing research for this. We've seen lots of videos from retailers showing how to remove the pill balls with either pill shavers or other methods to, physically remove them. And that's a very common way to do that. And sometimes you just have to do a little bit of maintenance on these fabrics if you do see pilling to occur. But there's really no correlation between pilling and durability. It's just visually unappealing. And so that's really what we're going to talk about a little bit today is, it's fun. Like we've talked about, fabrics with spun yarns, have a chance to pill a little bit more. But if they're tightly woven, they'll pill less. So there's a lot of variables that go into pilling. It's not just one fiber type or the fact that it's got spun yarn in it. There's a lot of different variables that go into why a fabric might pill more than another. And so I am going to move into the next topic here, which is how do we, what's the standards, residential guidelines. And, that's one issue here that we have in our industry in the residential market is that we have a guidelines that were established in 1980 and then revised back in 2010. But a lot of it does not reflect actual standards. They really are guidelines. So there's really no clear residential industry standards for us at the moment. A lot of retailers and furniture manufacturers have created their own standards, and in some cases, it's good because it allows us to have very strict, guidelines to go by. But then in other cases, because there's different retailers, different manufacturers, they also can lead to confusion. So what pilling and abrasion, which is what we're going to talk about today, the abrasion guideline refers to a standard ASTM method. But the pilling really has, it actually states that there's no acceptable test method for pilling of woven and knit upholstery fabrics that's suitable for direct comparison to actual use. Excessive in-use pilling is nonetheless undesirable. And that's a direct quote from the guidelines. So with that being said, there's a lot of industry today uses Martindale for pilling. And but we feel like that we should have more guidelines and actually we should have standards, not necessarily guidelines here, so that way we're all operating under the same on the same page, so to speak. So, and it would help honestly, it would help clear up a lot of the confusion if there were some industry standards instead of them just being guidelines. So I wanted to make that point because in a lot of cases in other industries, you have real specific standards that we have to meet, but here it really is left up to either the furniture manufacturer, retailer, or the fabric manufacturer who's providing the fabric. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. And Andrew's going to talk a little bit more about test methods and best practices.
Thanks, Leanne. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Martindale and Weizenbeek test methods. These are the standard test methods for pilling and abrasion in North America. During these tests, it's all about the details. It's important to ask questions, not only about the results, but how the fabric is tested. The first test method we will discuss is the Martindale pilling. I'm going to give a short description of the process before watching a video of the actual test. Most retailers follow ASTM 4970 as a starting point. Depending on the customer's requirements, specimens are laundered 3 times and conditioned in a lab for 4 to 24 hours. Some customers may specify dry cleaning before testing. Some are not laundered at all. 6 samples are cut into circles using a die cutter for the machine's holders. The samples can be tested face-to-face. The Martindale pilling test will run in the form of a geometric figure, starting out as a straight line, which gradually widens into an ellipse, then a circle, then back into a straight line in the opposite direction. Once the tester completes the 16 movements, this will count as one cycle. In the beginning of the video, it will show a pencil drawing the pattern. The machine will run 100 cycles and the specimen is evaluated. Typically continuing to 300 cycles, but can be run up to 1,000 cycles. At the end of the desired number of cycles, the specimens are compared to photographic standards. Next, we will watch a short video of the process. So here's an example of the Lissajous pattern the Martindale machine will run. The specimens are prepared and cut into 1.5 and 5.5 inch circles for the test. These specimens are secured in the holders on the top and bottom. The number of cycles is predetermined according to the customer's and/or internal requirements. At the end of the test, the specimens are reviewed and graded. Shown here is the photographic standards the samples will be compared to. The grading scale goes from grade 5, which is considered no pilling, to a grade 1, which is very severe pilling. Some retailers require a grade 3 or above, and others require grade 4 and above. But not all fabrics are the same. Comparing a slubby textured fabric to the standard photographs can be difficult. Also, some shades of fabrics can affect the rating of the specimen. It's hard to only talk about pilling without addressing abrasion. We typically look at both when addressing durability. The next test method we will discuss is the Weizenbeek abrasion. This utilizes an oscillating cylinder covered with a cotton duct material or stainless steel wire mesh. You're going to cut at least 2 samples from the warp direction and 2 samples from the filling direction. Tension and compression force can be adjusted depending on the product you are testing. The residential guidelines are 4 pound force on tension and 3 pound force on load. Now we're going to watch a short video of the testing procedure for Weizenbeek. Each machine can run up to 4 samples at a time. There's going to be 2 cut in the warp direction and 2 cut in the filling direction. The video is showcasing the use of cotton duct. The tester will set a counter and check the status at various intervals. Once the wear is identified, testers will reduce the interval until failure is detected. The tester is looking for broken yarns, color change, fabric integrity, and surface effect. This table shows the various categories for fabric use, starting with light-duty residential and working up to high-traffic commercial. Light duty will be used in rooms not often visited, like formal living rooms or dining rooms. High-traffic commercial will be 24-hour healthcare facilities, transportation terminals, and casinos. Milliken's residential fabrics are categorized as heavy-duty residential. Now let's discuss some of Milliken's best practices. Since these 2 tests are only listed as guidelines, Milliken internally promotes both test methods for residential fabrics of the Weizenbeek and Martindale. Both help understand fabric durability. When designing or developing a fabric, you must understand the final use. All fabrics have a breaking point. Some are sooner than others. Here's some recommended testing. Abrasion gives you a nice back and forth action on the fabric, which will simulate getting up and sitting back down on a sofa. One method is the wire screen, load set at 3, tension 4. There's 15,000 double rubs is the standard for performance fabrics. Pilling gives you a circular type motion, which is close to squirming or a movement while sitting. This is typically 300 cycles run face-to-face with 3 kilopascal. You have to remember, there are many abrasives for pilling. There's wire mesh, wool, cotton duck, and even the same fabric to itself. When testing face-to-face, this setup will not allow you to compare fabrics to each other. This method is only good to show how well the fabrics resist pilling when rubbed against the same fabric, like on a cushion-to-cushion movement. An abrading like cotton duck may be more aggressive in the pilling test, but it will show differences between fabric if that outcome has become desired. Because there are so many variations, it's best to pick a method and setup and stick to it. Switching back and forth between setups can cause confusion. This also can create false positives or negatives on your products. The first 2 examples were tested using wire mesh at 15,000 and 30,000 double rubs. The second 2 were tested using cotton duck at 15,000 and 30,000 double rubs. This is the same test, same cycles, different abrading. Ideally, it's good to test a failure, but this can be time consuming. It's always good to have some sort of target and then go beyond some amount to make sure that the failure is not too close to the target. The sample on the left passed 15,000 double rubs, but then failed a short time later. We even tested the same fabric to 30,000 double rubs, and the hole got even larger. This pilling example was run at 100 cycles, but would change the pressure from 3 to 12 kilopascals. This shows how much impact the setup has and why every detail in the test is important. Notice the more pilling at the higher pressure on the right. Again, a common residential setup is 3 kilopascals at 300 cycles, but the number of cycles and setup are generally dependent on the retailer or manufacturer to specify, since they are not test specifications. If you're not sure, it's always good to ask to verify with your retailer their requirements. When testing fabrics on outside lab, make sure they send the details on the settings when they supply the test results. What pressure did they run? What abrading did they use? How many cycles?
Okay. Thanks, Andrew. So now we're going to move into some key questions that we feel like should be asked when it comes to fabrics in this market. The first one is fabric for residential or contract or both? And I think that's important because if you need a fabric to meet a commercial guideline and a residential one, you're going to have to default to the higher standard. In this case, the commercial standards are higher when it comes to both Wiesenbeek and Martindale, for example. So an example here on Wiesenbeek is that commercial standards usually are 50,000 double rubs with cotton duck, and then the tension and the load are different. They're usually set at 4 and 6 versus the 3 and 4. So back to Andrew's point of the devil's in the details, it's very important to know where this fabric is going to be used and how it's going to be used, so that it's tested appropriately. And the next question here is, what type of furniture and where is it going to be used? Because, for example, there's things that we can do in the furniture design too that will help support the fabric. So if it's used in the arm, if there's padding used in the arm, then that will definitely help support that fabric. Because a fabric that's over a hard edge is going to definitely wear faster than if it had some cushion and support behind it. And then, is this fabric being promoted as performance? I think that's an important question too, because we have a lot of performance fabrics today in the market, and I think consumers expect those fabrics to last longer. For one reason, they pay more for them generally. So those fabrics need to meet a higher level of abrasion and pilling requirements opposed to other fabrics in the line. And that needs to be really clearly communicated, which really gets us to our last question here. Key question is, how is the durability communicated to consumers? And that's probably the hardest one for everyone, is because it's so complex. as just even for us in the industry. And then so being able to create a clear and concise message about what durability and performance means to your brand is very important, so that customers can understand what that means when they're buying a performance fabric or buying a fabric that has higher durability. And last here, we have a slide on, what to expect from Milliken. We sell a lot of different fabrics. We sell into the commercial market as well as residential. Our Breathe by Milliken fabrics, our sustainable performance collection, they've been designed to be used in these heavy-duty applications. So they're not only sustainable, but durable and cleanable. We offer both natural fibers and recycled polyester fabrics, giving you choice. And I think that's what's important today, is that we want to give our customers choice. Everybody wants choice. We're used to having everything at our fingertips today, and that's very important. And we definitely want to have choices when it comes to fabric. And it's important to make sure that we're clear in what these fabrics can do. For us, our natural fibers and our line will all meet the 15 to 30,000 double rubs, but our polyesters will even meet the commercial standards of over 50,000, for example. So we want everyone to know that that we believe that this is a very important thing to communicate as we sell our product. And I think it's important not only for the end consumer, but even for furniture manufacturers and retailers today. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I put up on the screen some of our social media handles here for you to hopefully join us. We'd love to continue the conversation on social. And I also listed our website and our Breathe by Milliken site. So if you'd like to learn more information about our fabrics and just continue this conversation, we would love to hear from you. So I will turn this back over to Mark for questions, I think, is where we are now.
Yes. All right. Yes, we're now going to be opening up the webinar for questions. If you've not already submitted your questions, you can now do so by inputting them in the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Looks like one of the first questions we have here are, what are some ways to avoid pilling?
Leanne, I'll take this question.
Okay.
So some ways to avoid the pilling during the manufacturing process, there's a process called singeing. So the product can be ran over hot plates or an open burner to remove the loose fibers. When constructing the fabric, there's in the yarn making process, you can have a higher number of twists per inch. That will help make those fibers. Then there's also chemical additives that can be added to help reduce pilling. Coatings can be added to the yarn or fabrics. Just make sure you work with your customer on what processes are needed to meet the requirements. Make sure to test your fabric after you make any of these changes, because you might have fixed one problem from the pilling, but then created another.
Okay, great. Looks like another question we have here is, how does pilling differ from abrasion, or are they interconnected?
I can take this one. This is Leanne. So there's no correlation really between the two. They're related in that abrasion is going to give you more of a back and forth type and scenario when we're talking about wear, and then pilling is more of a circular motion. So if you think it in just layman's terms, abrasion testing, this Weizenbeek that we refer to, double rubs, is basically rubbing back and forth. And then pilling is going to be in a circular, we'll call it an ellipse or a liaison, a technical term is liaison, but that motion, so you're basically looking at different actions. So they are related, but they're not they don't necessarily correlate. And so you could have different results. You could have a fabric pass pilling and not be a pilling problem, but have an abrasion issue, or vice versa. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great. Looks like another question we have here is, what is the brush pill test?
The brush pill, that's a standard ASTM method where you're going to be taking a fabric into a device, and it's actually going to have a brush, and you're basically going to brush the fabric for a certain number of cycles, and then I think you also put the fabric face to face for a certain number of cycles, and then you review that aesthetically. And it's just like the pilling test. These are visual and all of these are all visual assessments. So you look at the fabric to look to see if you have any yarn breakage. That's the main thing that you're looking for. A brush pill test might be a little bit more of a severe test. So if you have a fabric that has spun yarn or may have, known to be more of a pilling concern, like some of your man-made fibers, you may want to run a brush pill test in addition to a Martindale test.
Okay, great. Another question we have here is, will the same fiber type have similar results on Martindale pilling?
I'll take this one, Leanne.
Okay.
The short answer on this one is no. There's just so many variables that go into making a fabric. What type of cotton did you use? How was it manufactured? Was it open end? Was it ring spun? Are you using applied yarns, applied in the warp, applied in the fill? What are the weave types? How were they finished? There's just so many different variables that if you take one cotton fabric, you could have different pilling results versus another cotton fabric, to say.
Okay, awesome. Another question here is, are there other pilling tests?
Yes, there are. Just like the question about brush pill, there's also another test called the random tumble pilling test, which is also an ASTM test, where you're actually going to simulate the laundry process or tumbling of the fabric with an abradant in there. And you're going to go through a certain number of cycles, and then you're going to visually assess the fabric after it goes through this tumbling process. Another one that we don't always think about is just a repeated home laundry type test, where you wash the fabric multiple times and then look at it for a visual assessment to see whether or not the fabric is going to have any pilling or pill balls associated just from the laundry. Because as I said earlier in the beginning of the presentation, laundry is also can also create pilling problems just because of the friction that you get in that process.
Okay, great. Another question here is, why do fabrics with man-made fibers tend to show more pilling than natural fiber fabrics?
I'll take that one. So one issue is that man-made fibers tend to be very strong, and so when the fiber starts to break off, it tends to hold the fiber that holds that pill ball, let's say, onto it. So it'll actually the pill ball will actually show up and stay on the fabric surface. So that's one reason why you may see it more in, say, a man-made fiber, so like an acrylic, it's kind of a known fiber that has pilling issues, versus like a man-made, like a natural fiber, like a cotton, because those fibers are a little weaker and they tend to just break off, and so you don't normally see the pill balls as easily as you would in, say, a man-made fiber.
Okay. Another question that we got here is, what is it about today's popular fabrics that leads to more frequent pilling versus years ago? Is it the slubby texture?
I do feel like fabrics today I think the market is looking for, more texture, more slubs, more, surface interest. And that creates more opportunity for fabric manufacturers to figure out how to make constructions that give consumers what they want without, the technical issues that can be associated. So I think it is a challenge today. And so but there's so many variables that go into that, because you're looking at yarn selection and the type of yarn. You're looking at the way you weave the different kind of weaves that to hold those yarns in place. So while I do feel like it's more challenging, we are able to figure out ways to present these looks where they do not have problems today also. But yeah, it is more challenging, and that's definitely true with the new looks and thicker constructions that we have today.
Okay. Another question is, do higher fabric grades indicate better fabric durability?
I'd say not necessarily. It's usually, grades are usually priced, and so that's something that I think has to be clearly articulated to customers, that that's more about the price of the fabric, not necessarily the durability, because you can have a performance fabric that's in, like, say, a lower grade and an A or a 1, and you may also have a performance fabric that's in a grade D or E, and they have different price. So it's more about price than it is actually about the pilling or the abrasion properties.
Okay, it looks like all of the questions that we can get to today. If there are any other questions that we haven't been able to answer, we will get back to you with those through email. And that looks like it concludes today's presentation. Andrew and Leanne, I want to thank you both for your time today and the valuable insights you provided, and I want to thank everyone for attending today's presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank everybody for joining us today.